This is your last meal in this house? My parents smiled triumphantly. I calmly reached into my bag and slid a thick manila envelope across the polished oak table. Yours too, I replied. They read it once. Then they read it again. All the color drained from their faces. You cannot do this, my father stammered. Before I continue with what happened next, let me know where you are watching this video from in the comments below. Do not forget to hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up against the very family members who constantly underestimated your worth. My name is Morgan and I am 30 years old. On the surface, my family has always treated me like a dry, boring failure. But the truth is, I am a lead forensic accountant at one of the top law firms in the country. My family lives in Buckhead, Atlanta, an affluent neighborhood that stands as a symbol of upper-class success for African Americans. Our $4 million historic mansion was always stunning on the outside, but completely cold and toxic on the inside. My parents, Desmond and Brenda, care about appearances more than anything else in the world. They have always blindly favored my older sister, Vanessa. Vanessa is 32 years old and works as a lifestyle influencer on social media. She is incredibly arrogant and always plays the victim or acts like she is the only perfect person in the room. And of course, there is Spencer, her 35-year-old husband. Spencer is a white man who works as a director at a private equity firm. He constantly acts condescending and treats everyone like they are beneath him. My parents are completely blinded by his so-called success and practically worship the ground he walks on. Everything finally exploded during my parents' 35th wedding anniversary dinner. The party was held right in the grand dining room of our mansion. The atmosphere started out elegant with crystal chandeliers glowing overhead and expensive catered food on the table. But as usual, I was the prime target for their subtle insults. My mother Brenda looked me up and down, judging my simple professional clothes, and scoffed. She then turned her attention to Vanessa, praising her designer dress that cost thousands of dollars. I just sat there silently and took a sip of water. I was entirely used to being treated like a ghost in my own family. Suddenly, my father Desmond stood up from his chair. He tapped his silver spoon against his champagne glass to get everyone's attention. The entire table went silent. My father cleared his throat and flashed a massive, proud smile in the direction of Vanessa and Spencer. Today, in honor of our anniversary, your mother and I have a very important announcement to make, he said, his voice booming with pride. We have decided to gift the entire guesthouse property to Vanessa and Spencer as an anniversary present. You two can tear it down and build a massive swimming pool or whatever else you want. I froze. That guest house was not just where I was currently living. For the past 7 years, when my father's company was struggling financially, I used my own money to pay the property taxes and maintain that building. I had poured tens of thousands of dollars of my own hard-earned salary to keep the bank from foreclosing on it. And now they were just casually snatching it away to hand it over to my golden child sister. Before I could even process the disrespect or say a single word, Spencer, my arrogant brother-in-law, let out a mocking smirk. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a check, and slid it across the table toward me. "Take it, Morgan," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a $5,000 relocation assistance from me to you. I know your little bean counter job barely pays enough to survive. Take this money and go rent a tiny apartment in some bad neighborhood. Stop ruining our view here." Anger boiled hot in my chest, but I forced my face to remain perfectly calm. I looked down at the check and then looked straight into Spencer's eyes. Slowly, I picked up the piece of paper and ripped it in half, right in front of him. Then I tore it into quarters, letting the small shredded pieces flutter down onto the pristine tablecloth. Spencer's face immediately turned bright red. "What is wrong with you?" he growled. My mother gasped loudly, covering her mouth. "Morgan, how dare you show such uneducated disrespect to your brother-in-law?" she shrieked. My father slammed his heavy hand down on the table, pointing a shaking finger right at my face. "This is your last meal in this house," he yelled. "You have 2 hours to pack all your trash and get out of here." They thought I was going to cry. They expected me to break down and beg for their mercy. But they had absolutely no idea that I was not just investigating Spencer's fraudulent investment fund. They did not know I was holding a single document that was about to strip away everything they were so proud of. My father just sat down looking incredibly satisfied. Vanessa squealed with delight and threw her arms tightly around Spencer. Spencer just sat there with that signature arrogant smirk on his face. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his expensive tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp piece of paper and deliberately slid it across the long dining table. The paper glided over the smooth wood and stopped right next to my dinner plate. I looked down. It was a check made out to me for $5,000. Consider that a little relocation assistance from me to you, Morgan Spencer said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. We all know your little bean counter job at the law firm barely pays enough to cover the utilities. Life is hard out there for a single woman. Take this money and go find yourself a cheap apartment somewhere. Maybe you should look in a neighborhood more suited to your income level, somewhere far away from upscale Buckhead. The sheer audacity of this man was truly astonishing. He had been married to my sister for barely 2 years, and he already acted like he owned our entire family. He loved playing the wealthy white savior, throwing crumbs to the poor unfortunate relatives. And my parents completely bought into it. They thought having a private equity director in the family elevated their status. They ignored his condescending attitude, his arrogance, and his constant need to belittle everyone around him. I did not even touch the check. Instead, I slowly lifted my wine glass and took a very slow, measured sip. The entire dining room fell into a tense silence waiting for my reaction. I knew exactly what they were expecting. They wanted me to lose my temper. They wanted me to scream, cry, or throw things. They wanted to see an angry, out-of-control woman so they could justify their cruel decision to kick me out of the house. I decided I would never give them that satisfaction. That is a very generous offer, Spencer, I said, my voice completely calm and steady. $5,000 is quite a lot of money to just throw away so easily right here at the dinner table, especially considering your actual current financial situation. Spencer's half-smile faded slightly. His pale blue eyes narrowed warily. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. I set my wineglass down on the table. The sound of the glass hitting the wood echoed clearly in the quiet room. "I am just surprised that you have $5,000 in cash readily available right now." I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his increasingly rigid face. "Because according to the county tax records that I happen to review, you still owe over $40,000 in unpaid property taxes on your downtown luxury condo from last year. It would be a massive embarrassment if the city sent someone to seize your assets while you are busy handing out charity to your sister-in-law." The blood seemed to drain from Spencer's face instantly. He shifted uncomfortably in his plush chair and used his finger to pull at his expensive silk tie as if it were choking him. Vanessa stopped smiling. She looked at him with confusion and a bit of worry. "Honey, what is she talking about?" Vanessa asked in her high-pitched, whiny voice. Spencer quickly regained his composure. He forced out a loud, awkward laugh to brush it off. "It is just a minor clerical error with the paperwork, Vanessa," he lied smoothly. "My accountant is already handling it, so there is nothing to worry about. Your sister is just being petty because she is jealous of our success. She spends all day staring at boring spreadsheets, so she always thinks she is some financial genius who can judge others." But I saw the brief flash of panic in his eyes. He knew that I had uncovered his secret. As a federal forensic accountant, I always considered it my duty to know every detail about the people who tried to belittle me. His investment fund was bleeding money. His cash flow was drying up, and he was desperately using my family as a shield to maintain his fake wealthy image. But I was not done yet. I wanted to expose him just a little bit more. "A clerical error," I repeated softly. "That is very interesting, because the notice of default that was sent out last month did not look like a simple clerical error at all. It looked like someone who is desperately struggling to maintain a lavish lifestyle that he can absolutely no longer afford." Spencer's face immediately turned bright red with anger. He slammed his hand down hard on the table, shaking the expensive china plates and spilling some water. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, he hissed through clenched teeth, completely dropping his fake polite facade. I am trying to help you. I am giving you a gift that you could barely save up for in a lifetime of working. You should be on your knees thanking me instead of sitting there making up pathetic lies to ruin my family's anniversary dinner. I remained sitting quietly in my chair, completely unfazed by his outburst. His uncontrollable anger only proved more clearly that I had hit a nerve. You can fool my sister, and you can deceive my parents. Spencer, I said, you can use your expensive tailored suits, your designer watches, and your fancy investment jargon to cover up the emptiness in your bank accounts. But numbers never lie, and I am someone who reads and understands those numbers every single day. The atmosphere in this dining room was now so tense you could cut it with a knife. Spencer was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists on the table. He never expected that the person who was always considered the dull failure of the family could fight back so fatally and accurately. He always assumed I was just a timid mouse that could be easily stepped on, but today he was shocked to realize he had just woken up something much more dangerous. My parents still sat in silence, their mouths hanging open at this intense confrontation, seemingly unable to believe what they were hearing. The humiliation he intended to throw in my face was now slowly turning back to burn down his own perfect facade. Before I could even pull the envelope out of my bag, my mother Brenda stood up so fast, her heavy wooden chair screeched loudly against the polished hardwood floor. She was absolutely livid. The veins in her neck were bulging and her eyes were wide with a furious kind of disbelief. She could not stand the fact that I was not backing down from Spencer and my father. In her mind, I was defying the natural order of our family hierarchy. Put your hands on the table right now, Morgan. She snapped, her voice sharp and authoritative. You are not going to stand there and threaten your father in his own house. And you are certainly not going to disrespect Spencer after everything he has brought to this family. I let my hand fall away from my bag and looked at the woman who had birthed me. Brenda was the master of weaponizing the past. She had spent my entire life keeping a running tally of every single thing she had ever done for me, holding it over my head like a massive unpayable debt. You listen to me, you ungrateful child! She began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. You owe us your life. Do you hear me? You owe us your very existence. Your father and I worked our fingers to the bone to give you a life of privilege in Buckhead. We put food in your mouth, we put clothes on your back, and we gave you a safe neighborhood to grow up in. And this is how you repay us, by acting like you own the place just because you helped out a little bit when times were tough. Helped out a little bit. I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I paid the mortgage for 7 straight years. I paid the property taxes when the county was going to auction this house off. I paid for your luxury car lease so the neighbors would not know Dad lost his business. That was your duty as a daughter. She screamed, her face turning red. It was not a favor, Morgan. It was rent. You lived in that guest house and you ate our food. Those payments were nothing more than back rent for the 18 years we supported you before you became this cold, calculating machine. Family takes care of family. I stared at her, feeling a familiar hollow ache in my chest. This was the toxic core of our family dynamic. They disguised their financial exploitation as parental sacrifice. They used the concept of family obligation as a weapon to drain me dry while treating me like an unwanted guest in my own childhood home. There is a massive difference between family obligation and financial abuse. Mom, I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the storm raging inside me. Family obligation is helping out when someone falls on hard times. Financial abuse is what you and Dad did to me. How dare you? She gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if I had physically struck her. I did not stop. Do you remember my 18th birthday, Mom? I asked, looking her dead in the eye. Because I remember it perfectly. I remember applying for my first student loan for college and finding out my credit score was completely destroyed. I remember discovering that you and Dad had opened 4 different credit cards in my name when I was 16 years old and maxed them all out to pay for Vanessa's lavish Sweet 16 party and her designer wardrobe. The dining room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt heavy and suffocating. Spencer looked back and forth between us, suddenly looking a little unsure of the perfect family he had married into. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, refusing to make eye contact with me. "That was a misunderstanding," my father muttered gruffly, crossing his arms over his chest. "We were going to pay it back. We just needed a little bridge loan, and your credit was clean." "You ruined my credit before I was even an adult," I shot back. "I had to work 3 jobs in college just to pay off the debt you accumulated in my name. And when Vanessa's cosmetics business went under, you remortgaged this house to bail her out. But when the bank came knocking to collect, you did not go to Vanessa. You did not go to your golden child. You came to the daughter you always called a burden." "You are twisting the truth," Brenda cried out, tears finally spilling over her carefully applied makeup. "You always do this, Morgan. You always play the victim. We gave you the guest house to live in because we pitied you. You had no husband. You had no social life. We gave you a place to stay, and you just happened to help with the bills. I paid $80,000 to fix the foundation of that guest house," I reminded her calmly. "I put on a new roof. I upgraded the plumbing. I did not just pay bills, Mom. I rebuilt that property from the ground up while you and Dad took cruises to the Bahamas on my dime." "It is our land," my father interrupted, his voice booming with forced authority. "Whatever you built on it belongs to us. You are an investment, Morgan. Parents invest in their children and they expect a return. Vanessa gave us joy and status. You gave us headaches. Paying those bills was the least you could do to make up for your sour personality." "An investment," I repeated, feeling a cold smile slowly form on my lips. "So that is what I am to you. An investment portfolio that you can drain whenever you need cash." "Yes, exactly," my mother snapped, wiping a tear from her cheek. "And right now, this family needs that guest house for Vanessa and Spencer. They are going to build a legacy. They are going to give us grandchildren. Your duty is to step aside and let your sister thrive. If you had any shred of decency left in that calculating brain of yours, you would pack your bags and leave tonight without demanding a single penny." Spencer, who had been quietly watching this entire exchange, suddenly regained his smug confidence. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together behind his head. "You heard your mother, Morgan," he said with a patronizing smirk. "It is time to face reality. You are not wanted here. You are just the hired help who overstayed her welcome. Take the $5,000 I offered you and walk away with whatever little dignity you have left." I looked at the 4 of them sitting around that expensive table. My mother still playing the wounded matriarch. My father puffing his chest with unearned pride. My sister hiding behind her false innocence. And the outsider who thought he had won. They were a perfect united front of toxicity and delusion. They truly believed they had bullied me into submission using the heavy chains of guilt and obligation. They thought my silence was defeat. They thought the tears burning in the back of my eyes meant they had finally broken my spirit. They did not realize those were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of absolute liberation. Because hearing my mother explicitly state that I was nothing more than an exploited financial asset completely severed the last remaining string of guilt I held on to. I no longer felt bad for what I was about to do to them. I looked down at my bag again. The manila envelope was right there waiting. I reached my hand inside, feeling the smooth, thick paper against my fingertips. I took a deep breath, letting the cold reality of my family dynamic settle into my bones one last time. "You are right, Mom," I said softly, pulling my hand out of the bag and bringing the envelope up to the edge of the table. "Family takes care of family, but unfortunately for all of you, we stopped being family a very long time ago." I placed the thick manila envelope flat on the table right next to the shredded pieces of Spencer's check. The room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My father stared at the thick manila envelope as if it were a bomb. Spencer frowned, his arrogant mask slipping just a fraction as he looked from the shredded pieces of his check to the sealed envelope. He slowly reached his hand out toward it, but before his fingers could even graze the paper, a loud dramatic sob shattered the heavy silence. We all turned to look at Vanessa. She had her face buried in her perfectly manicured hands and her shoulders were shaking violently. It was a performance I had seen a million times before. Whenever Vanessa felt the spotlight shifting away from her, or whenever she sensed that someone else was gaining the upper hand, she deployed her ultimate weapon. Tears. "Oh, Vanessa, honey, what is wrong?" My mother gasped instantly, forgetting all about her anger toward me. She rushed around the table and wrapped her arms around her golden child. Vanessa lifted her head. Her eyes were remarkably dry for someone sobbing so loudly, but her face was crumpled into a picture of pure misery. She sniffled delicately and placed both hands over her perfectly flat stomach, rubbing it in slow, deliberate circles. "I just cannot take this anymore," Vanessa wailed, leaning into our mother's embrace. "I cannot deal with this toxic energy, Morgan. This was supposed to be a beautiful night for our family. This was supposed to be a celebration. And you are ruining it, just like you ruin everything else." My father immediately softened his posture, slumping as he looked at his precious oldest daughter. He walked over and patted her shoulder, glaring at me as if I had just committed a violent crime. "Look what you have done," he muttered, shaking his head in disgust. "You made your sister cry on our anniversary." "I am not just crying for me," Vanessa choked out, her voice rising in pitch until it was almost a shriek. "I am crying for the baby." The entire room seemed to freeze. My mother let out a loud gasp of pure joy and pulled back to look at Vanessa. My father stood up straight, his eyes wide with shock and delight. Even Spencer managed to look like a proud patriarch, puffing his chest out and placing a protective hand on Vanessa's chair. "A baby!" my mother squealed, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Vanessa, are you serious?" Vanessa nodded bravely, dabbing at her dry eyes with a linen napkin. "Yes, Mom," she whispered softly. "Spencer and I just found out last week. We are pregnant. We were going to tell you during dessert, but Morgan just had to turn this entire evening into a hateful, jealous screaming match." I sat there watching the entire production with a detached sense of clinical fascination. It was honestly impressive how quickly she could pivot the narrative to make herself the supreme victim and the ultimate hero at the exact same time. "We need that guest house," Morgan. Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "We need a safe, clean environment to raise this child. Our condo downtown is just too small, and it is not a good neighborhood for a family. We want to raise the first grandchild right here on the family estate. We want to give Mom and Dad the perfect mixed-race grandchild they have always dreamed of." I almost laughed out loud at the phrasing. The perfect mixed-race grandchild. Vanessa knew exactly what buttons to push. My parents were obsessed with social climbing and image. To them, having a wealthy white son-in-law was a status symbol. Having a light-skinned grandchild with green eyes and soft curls would be their ultimate trophy to parade around the country club. Vanessa was holding out the one prize they wanted more than anything else, and she was using it as a weapon to destroy me. "But you do not care about any of that, do you, Morgan?" Vanessa spat, her tone suddenly turning vicious. "You do not care about family. You do not care about my baby. You are just a bitter, jealous spinster sitting alone in that guest house with your boring spreadsheets and your miserable little life." Spencer nodded in agreement, wrapping an arm around his wife. "It is obvious, Vanessa," he said, glaring at me. "She is just angry because no man will ever want her. She sees how happy we are and it kills her. She wants to drag you down to her level of misery." "You have always hated me," Vanessa cried out, pointing a trembling finger across the table. "Ever since we were little girls, you were jealous of me. You hated that I was pretty. You hated that I was popular. And now you hate that I have a successful husband and a beautiful baby on the way, while you have absolutely nothing. You are trying to steal my house because you cannot build a life of your own." The sheer projection was staggering. Vanessa was the one whose business had gone bankrupt. Vanessa was the one living entirely on credit cards and borrowed money. Yet here she was sitting in a dress paid for by stolen retirement funds, calling me the failure. "You need to leave Morgan," my mother said, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "You need to get out of this house right now before your toxic jealousy stresses your sister out any further. Do you want her to have a miscarriage? Is that what you want, you monster?" My father slammed his fist on the table again. The envelope I had placed there shifted slightly, but he did not even look at it. His eyes were burning with a hatred so deep it made my stomach turn. "I am not giving you 2 hours anymore," he growled. "I want you out of this dining room right now. Pack your bags and get off my property before I throw you out myself. You are no longer my daughter. You are a danger to my grandchild." I looked at Vanessa. She was still rubbing her stomach, but over my parents' shoulders she shot me a look of pure, triumphant malice. She gave me a tiny, mocking smirk. She thought she had won. She thought the pregnancy card was an automatic checkmate. In her mind, there was absolutely nothing I could say or do that would ever trump a new baby in the eyes of our parents. I did not say a word in my defense. I did not try to argue against her ridiculous accusations of jealousy. There was no point in fighting with a master manipulator who was currently being shielded by two deeply delusional enablers. Instead, I slowly reached out and tapped my index finger against the thick manila envelope sitting on the table. The dull thud of my nail against the paper drew Spencer's eyes back down. "Congratulations on the baby, Vanessa," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "It is truly a miracle. It really is." Vanessa frowned, slightly confused by my lack of outrage. "What is that supposed to mean?" she snapped. I kept my eyes locked on hers. "I just mean that it is going to be incredibly difficult to raise the perfect child when its father is sitting in a federal penitentiary and its mother is standing in an unemployment line." The silence returned instantly thicker and more oppressive than before. "What did you just say?" Spencer whispered, his face turning pale again. I gestured to the envelope. "I think it is time you open the envelope, Spencer," I said softly. "Or maybe Dad should open it, since his signature is the one you forged to steal $3 million. The crocodile tears stopped instantly. Vanessa's hands dropped from her stomach. The real show was finally about to begin. For a split second, no one breathed. My father stared at me, his jaw practically resting on the floor. He looked from me to Spencer and back again. But instead of questioning the man who was currently sweating profusely in his expensive suit, my father chose the path he always chose. He chose to attack me. He slammed his massive fist down on the dining table with such terrifying force that my mother's crystal wine glass tipped over. The dark red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a fresh blood stain. "That is enough," he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings and vibrating deep in my chest. "I have sat here and listened to you disrespect your mother. I have watched you maliciously mock your sister's pregnancy. But I will absolutely not sit here and let you slander my son-in-law with these sick, pathetic lies." I looked at my father with a mixture of pity and disgust. The blind loyalty he had for a white man who secretly looked down on him was almost tragic. "Dad, I am not lying," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly even. "Look at him. Look at Spencer's face right now. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. He took out a second mortgage on this house using your forged signature to cover his millions in losses." "Do not you dare speak to him!" my father shouted, pointing a trembling finger an inch from my nose. "Spencer is a highly respectable businessman. He manages hundreds of millions of dollars for elite clients. He is the reason this family is finally respected at the country club. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous little girl who cannot stand to see anyone else succeed. You fabricated whatever garbage is in that envelope just to ruin the happiest day of Vanessa's life. My father was so desperate to protect the illusion of his perfect wealthy family that he was willing to go down with a sinking ship. He turned his back on me and placed a reassuring hand on the younger man's shoulder. Spencer, who looked like he was about to vomit right there on the expensive rug, managed a weak, grateful nod. "Do not worry, son," my father said, his voice thick with misguided pride and affection. "We know she is crazy. We know she is just trying to extort us because she is a miserable failure who has nothing going for her. Nobody in this room believes a single word she says." Vanessa, having fully recovered from her temporary shock, chimed in right on cue to support the delusion. "You are a complete monster, Morgan," she hissed, leaning aggressively across the table. "You forged legal documents just to frame my husband. You are actually insane. Mom, we need to get a permanent restraining order against her before she physically hurts the baby." My mother was already nodding furiously, using a cloth napkin to dab at the spilled wine with shaking hands. "Yes, Desmond, we have to get her out of here tonight. She is a dangerous liability to all of us. She has completely lost her mind, and I will not have her toxic energy around my grandchild." My father slowly turned back to face me. His eyes were completely devoid of any paternal warmth or love. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust, as if I was a pest that had infested his home. He pulled his shoulders back, puffing out his chest, to deliver his final, ultimate judgment. "You have exactly 2 hours to pack your trash," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm octave. "2 hours, Morgan. And I want you completely off my property." I did not flinch. I simply sat there, looking at the man who was willing to throw his own flesh and blood out into the streets just to protect a con artist who was actively robbing him blind. "Your property," I repeated softly, letting the words hang in the tense air. "Yes, my property," my father barked, slamming his open palm on the table again for emphasis. "This house belongs to me and your mother. We worked our entire lives for it. And as of tonight, the guest house belongs to Vanessa and Spencer. Your name is not on the deed, Morgan. It never was. You have absolutely no legal right to be here. You are nothing more than a glorified squatter who has massively overstayed her welcome." He took a heavy step closer, towering over my chair in his expensive tailored suit. "If you are not gone in exactly 120 minutes, I am calling the Atlanta Police Department. I will tell them we have an aggressive, hostile trespasser on the premises who refuses to leave. I will have them drag you out of here in handcuffs, right in front of all the wealthy neighbors you are so jealous of. And with your little federal government job and arrest record for criminal trespassing and harassment, will permanently ruin your career. So I strongly suggest you get moving right now." The threat hung heavily in the dead silence of the dining room. He was so incredibly proud of himself. He truly thought he held the ultimate trump card. He thought the combined threat of police involvement and public humiliation would finally break my spirit and force me to scurry away like a frightened animal. He believed the deed to the house was his impenetrable shield against my accusations. Vanessa smirked, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "You heard him, Morgan," she taunted. "Time is ticking. Maybe you can call an Uber to take you to a downtown homeless shelter. I hear they have free soup on Thursdays." Spencer seemed to regain a tiny fraction of his normal color upon hearing the police threat. He straightened his silk tie and let out a breathless, arrogant little chuckle. "You really overplayed your hand this time, Morgan," he sneered, his confidence slowly returning. "You should have just taken the $5,000 check and walked away quietly. Now you get absolutely nothing." They were all staring at me, waiting for the inevitable panic to set in, waiting for the hot tears of defeat, waiting for me to beg for forgiveness and ask for just one more night in the guest house. They wanted to see me humiliated, broken, and completely destroyed. But the panic never came. Instead, a profound sense of absolute peace washed over me. This was the moment of no return. My father had just drawn the final battle line and willingly handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy his entire world. He wanted to talk about property deeds and legal rights. He wanted to bring the police authorities into this family dispute. It was honestly almost too perfect. I slowly stood up from my chair, taking my time smoothing out the front of my professional dress. I looked at the spilled wine staining the table, then at the angry, arrogant faces of the people who shared my DNA. 2 hours, I said, nodding slowly as if carefully considering his generous offer. Okay, Dad, 2 hours it is. 2. But I honestly do not think you need to wait that long to call the cops. My father narrowed his eyes, deeply confused by my complete lack of fear or submission. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice wavering just a fraction. I reached down and picked up the thick manila envelope that was still sitting untouched next to the shredded pieces of Spencer's check. I held it up in the dim light of the crystal chandelier, letting them all see the federal seal stamped on the front. I am saying you should call them right now, I replied, my voice ringing clear and authoritative in the silent room. In fact, I highly encourage it. Because when the authorities get here, they are going to need to see exactly whose name is actually on the deed to this $4 million estate. For a moment, nobody moved a single muscle. My father just stared at me, his face contorted in a mask of absolute bewilderment. He was so certain of his ownership, so convinced of his absolute power over me, that the mere suggestion that the deed might say otherwise momentarily short-circuited his brain. Then Spencer broke the silence. He let out a loud, forced guffaw, shaking his head, as if I had just told a pathetic joke. "You are bluffing, Morgan," he said, his voice a little too loud for the quiet room. "Mom and Dad bought this house 30 years ago. Their names are on the deed. You are just throwing out desperate lies to delay the inevitable. Dad, do not even listen to her. Just call the police and get her out of here." My father seemed to recover his senses at Spencer's words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "You really thought you could scare me in my own home?" he growled. "You really thought you could pull a fast one on me? I am dialing right now." He expected me to panic. He expected me to lunge across the table and beg him to put the phone down. He expected the tears that Vanessa used so effectively. He expected me to finally break under the immense pressure of losing my family and my home all at once. But I did not cry. I did not beg. Instead, I started to laugh. It started as a low chuckle deep in my chest. Then it grew louder, echoing off the crystal glasses and the expensive china. It was a genuine, unbothered laugh that bubbled up from a place of pure, absolute confidence. The sheer absurdity of their arrogance, the blind stupidity of their threats, it was all too much to hold in. My laughter cut through the tension in the room like a sharp blade. My father froze, his thumb hovering over the screen of his phone. My mother recoiled in her chair, looking at me as if I had just grown a second head. Vanessa, who was still playing the role of the traumatized pregnant victim, dropped her hands from her stomach and stared at me in genuine horror. But the most satisfying reaction belonged to Spencer. The arrogant smirk completely vanished from his face. His blue eyes widened, and I could see the exact moment a cold sliver of genuine fear pierced through his perfectly tailored armor. People who are bluffing do not laugh like that. People who are cornered do not laugh like that. Only people who know they have already won laugh like that. I let the laughter naturally fade away, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I took a deep breath, smoothing out my skirt as I sat back down in my chair. I decided right then and there to completely drop the topic of the house. Let them wonder about the deed for a few more minutes. I had bigger fish to fry, and I wanted to watch the main villain squirm before I delivered the final blow. I rested my elbows on the table and laced my fingers together, resting my chin on my hands. I turned my gaze completely away from my parents and locked my eyes dead onto Spencer. "So, Spencer," I said, my voice cheerful and conversational, Let us talk about something else entirely. Let us talk about your work. How is the real estate investment trust doing these days? Spencer blinked, clearly thrown off balance by the sudden pivot. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his collar. My business is none of your concern, he replied defensively, trying to regain his arrogant posture. But for the record, it is doing exceptionally well. We are managing an incredibly robust portfolio of Tier 1 commercial assets. A robust portfolio of Tier 1 commercial assets, I repeated, nodding slowly, as if I was genuinely impressed by his corporate jargon. That is wonderful news. And how many clients have you acquired lately? I mean real clients, Spencer. Not just my parents' gullible friends from the country club. Not just the elderly couples from our church congregation that Dad convinced to invest their entire retirement savings with your firm. Spencer shifted in his seat, the expensive leather creaking loudly in the quiet room. I have dozens of high-net-worth clients. He snapped, his voice taking on a defensive, frantic edge. My fund operates on complex financial algorithms that you could not possibly comprehend. I do not need to explain my client roster or my investment strategies to a low-level corporate accountant. You are right. You do not need to explain it to me, I agreed smoothly. But you might want to practice explaining those complex algorithms, because you are going to have to explain them to the federal authorities very soon. You see, Spencer, the funny thing about being a forensic accountant is that I look at the actual numbers behind the robust portfolios. And your numbers, they are absolutely fascinating. Vanessa looked back and forth between her husband and me, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. Babe, what is she talking about? Vanessa asked, her voice lacking its usual whiny confidence. Tell her to shut up, Spencer. Up. Spencer ignored his wife, keeping his eyes glued to me. His breathing had become shallow and rapid. You do not know what you are talking about, he hissed. You have zero access to my firm records. Everything is strictly confidential. That is where you are wrong. Spencer, I said, leaning slightly forward. You see, a few months ago, one of those elderly couples from church asked me to take a quick look at their quarterly statement. They were confused because the returns you promised them were not matching the actual deposits in their bank accounts. They thought it was just a simple technical glitch. But I knew better. I paused, letting the immense weight of my words press down on him. I saw a drop of sweat begin to bead on his forehead. My parents were watching the exchange in stunned silence, completely lost in the financial terminology, but acutely aware that the power dynamic in the room had drastically shifted. My father had completely forgotten about the phone in his hand. I started digging, Spencer, I continued, my voice dropping to a low, steady rhythm. And what I found was a masterpiece of creative financial fiction. Your real estate investment trust does not actually own any new commercial properties. The funds you collected from the country club members and the church congregation were never invested in the downtown development project you bragged about at Thanksgiving. Spencer opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His face was completely ashen, all the fake tan seemingly drained away. Instead of investing that capital, Spencer, I said, pronouncing each word with absolute clarity, you used the new money from your recent investors to pay the fake promised returns to your older investors. And you skimmed a massive management fee off the top of every transaction to pay for your luxury lifestyle. You used their retirement funds to pay for your custom suits, your expensive car lease, and to secretly bail out Vanessa's bankrupt cosmetics company without telling anyone. The room was so quiet, I could hear the steady hum of the refrigerator all the way in the kitchen. My father lowered his phone slowly, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. He had personally vouched for Spencer to all his friends. My mother covered her mouth with her trembling hand. Vanessa stared at Spencer, her eyes begging him to deny it, to laugh it off, to call me a jealous liar. But Spencer could not laugh. He was staring at me like a man who had just watched the ground open up beneath his feet to swallow him whole. The arrogant, successful investment banker had completely vanished, leaving behind a terrified, desperate criminal who knew he was caught. "You are running a Ponzi scheme, Spencer." I said the words hanging heavy and final in the dead air. "And it is collapsing right now as we speak." Spencer let out a harsh, desperate bark of laughter. He stood up violently from the table, nearly knocking his heavy wooden chair backward. "You are out of your damn mind," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "A Ponzi scheme! Are you listening to yourself right now?" He looked at my parents silently, begging them to intervene, but they were too stunned to speak. So he turned his full wrath back on me, puffing his chest out in a pathetic display of dominance. "Listen to me, you little nobody," he sneered, stepping away from the table to pace across the room. "I manage a fund worth over $50 million. I drive a car that costs more than you will make in a decade. My clients include state senators, tech CEOs, and real estate moguls. Who the hell are you to question my financial structure? You are a low-level bean counter, a glorified bookkeeper who spends her miserable days plugging numbers into an Excel spreadsheet for a local law firm. You do not know the first thing about high-level investment strategies or capital allocation." Vanessa nodded eagerly, grabbing onto his arrogant words like a life preserver. "Exactly," she chimed in, her voice shrill and panicked. "Spencer makes millions, Morgan. You are just a clerk. You probably saw a transaction you did not understand because you are not smart enough to grasp corporate finance." My father seemed to find his voice again, clinging to the hierarchy he worshipped. "Spencer is right, Morgan," he said strictly, his tone full of warning. "You have overstepped your bounds this time. You do not have the education or the pedigree to accuse a man of his stature of something so ridiculous. You just file taxes for a living. You know nothing about the real world of business. I let them rant. I let Spencer brag about his supposed millions, his offshore accounts, his elite status. I sat back and watched him build his pedestal as high as he possibly could, because I knew the fall was going to break him completely. I let him list his expensive cars and his exclusive country club memberships. I let him dig his own grave with every arrogant word that spilled out of his mouth. When he finally ran out of breath, standing there with his chest heaving and his face flushed red, I slowly reached back into my leather work bag sitting on the floor. I did not pull out another envelope. Instead, I pulled out a small black leather wallet. I flipped it open and tossed it onto the table right next to the spilled red wine. The heavy silver badge glinted brightly under the crystal chandelier. Next to it was my official federal identification card. Spencer stopped pacing instantly. His eyes darted to the badge and then back to my face. My father leaned in, squinting at the gold lettering on the leather wallet. "I am not a bookkeeper, Spencer," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a sharp scalpel. "And I do not just file taxes. I am the lead forensic accountant for the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. I am the person the federal government calls when arrogant little men like you try to play fast and loose with other people's money." The absolute silence that followed was deafening. I could actually hear Spencer's breathing hitch in his throat. "You see, for the past 8 years, my parents have loved telling everyone that I am just a boring, low-level clerk." I continued, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. It fit their narrative perfectly. It made Vanessa look better by comparison. So I never corrected them. I let them think I was just pushing pencils because my work requires absolute discretion. But my actual job is to hunt down white-collar criminals. I track dirty money across international borders through shell companies and into hidden offshore accounts. I dismantle financial frauds for a living. I locked eyes with Spencer, watching the last remaining drops of blood drain from his face. He looked like a ghost. "And for the last 8 months, Spencer, I have been tracking yours," I said softly. Spencer grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked like he might pass out right there in the dining room. "That is impossible." He choked out his voice, barely a terrified whisper. "You are lying. There is no way." "Am I?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Then please explain to me why the Cayman Islands shell company you set up last November, under your mother's maiden name?" suddenly transferred $2.5 million to a personal account in Zurich, right after Dad signed that second mortgage document. Explain why your chief compliance officer quietly resigned 3 weeks ago and immediately hired a top-tier criminal defense attorney. Vanessa let out a small confused whimper, looking up at her husband. Spencer? What is she talking about? What Cayman Islands account? She asked. Shut up, Vanessa Spencer hissed without looking at her. His eyes still glued to me with a mixture of pure terror and absolute hatred. I did not stop. I rattled off the details with cold, clinical precision, punishing him with the truth. I know about the fake quarterly reports you mailed to the church investors, Spencer. I know that you forged the auditing signatures using the names of accountants who have been dead for years. I know that your luxury condo downtown has a foreclosure notice taped to the front door right now because you have not paid the mortgage in 6 months. I know that the $50 million fund you just bragged about currently holds less than $12,000 in actual liquid assets. Every fact I dropped was another heavy nail in his coffin. The confident, aggressive investment banker was completely gone. In his place stood a pathetic, desperate thief who had just realized the walls had completely closed in on him. My mother was trembling violently, gripping the edge of her chair as if the room was spinning out of control. My father looked like he was having trouble breathing. The prestigious son-in-law he had worshipped, the man he had chosen over his own flesh and blood, was standing in front of him, utterly exposed as a complete and total fraud. "You tracked my firm," Spencer whispered, staring at the federal badge resting on the table. "For 8 months you just sat there and watched me." 8 months, I confirmed, nodding slowly. "And honestly, it was a remarkably sloppy operation, Spencer. You left a paper trail a mile wide. You were so arrogant, so completely convinced that you were smarter than everyone else, that you did not even bother to properly launder the stolen funds. You just moved money from one account to another to pay off whatever fire was burning hottest that week. It took my federal team less than 2 weeks to untangle the entire mess. We spent the remaining 7.5 months just building a bulletproof criminal case against you." Spencer looked like a trapped animal. He darted his eyes toward the front door in the hallway, then toward the large glass windows looking out over the manicured lawn. He was actually calculating whether or not he could run. "I would not do that if I were you," I said, noticing his shifting, panicked gaze. "Running will only make you look more guilty to the judge. And besides, you will not get very far in those expensive Italian leather shoes." "You set me up!" he suddenly screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You framed me because you hate me. You used your government position to target my business and ruin my life because you are jealous." "I did not frame you, Spencer," I replied calmly, resting my hands on the table. "You ruined your own life the second you decided to steal money from innocent people to fund your fake luxury lifestyle. The fact that you decided to steal from my parents, well, that just made catching you a personal bonus." Vanessa slammed her hands flat against the table, her perfectly manicured nails scraping harshly against the polished wood. She could not stand to see her husband humiliated, and she absolutely could not bear the thought of her own perfect world crumbling in front of our parents. "You are a miserable liar," she screamed, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. "Spencer is a financial genius and you are just a pathetic, jealous spinster. He did not steal anything. You fabricated all of those documents because you want to destroy us out of pure spite. You want to take away the only good thing this family has ever had." I slowly turned my head away from the sweating, terrified face of my brother-in-law and looked directly at my sister. The golden child. The one who could do no wrong. The one who had spent her entire 32 years on this earth stepping on my neck to elevate herself. She was breathing heavily, her $10,000 designer dress shifting as she trembled with desperate anger. "You really want to talk about fabricating things, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You really want to stand there dripping in designer labels and accuse a federal investigator of faking legal documents? Because if you truly want to play this game right now, we can absolutely play it." Vanessa lifted her chin, trying to maintain her superior posture, but I could see the slight tremor in her bottom lip. I have nothing to hide from you, she spat, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. My husband and I are incredibly successful. My cosmetics line is booming. We are building a massive empire while you sit alone in the dark, typing on a keyboard like a loser. An empire, I repeated, letting a small, cold smile touch my lips. That is a very interesting choice of words, Vanessa. Tell me exactly how booming is your luxury cosmetics line right now. Because the federal bankruptcy court in Delaware has a very different opinion about the current state of your empire. Vanessa's eyes darted to the side for a fraction of a second. A tiny, visible crack appeared in her flawless, confident facade. "Shut up!" she hissed, her voice suddenly losing its booming volume. "I am afraid I cannot do that," I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. "You see, Mom and Dad, Vanessa has been telling you that her beauty brand is expanding internationally. She told you that the supply chain delays were just standard growing pains for a massive corporate enterprise. But the actual truth is her company has not turned a single penny of profit in over 2 years. She secretly filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 14 months ago. Her warehouses are completely empty. Her inventory was liquidated by the bank to pay off her massive defaulting business loans. Her glorious empire is nothing but a mountain of unpaid vendor invoices and incredibly angry creditors." My mother gasped, pressing both of her trembling hands to her cheeks. "Vanessa, is this true?" my mother asked, her voice cracking with shock. "You told us the business was thriving. You just showed us the expensive new marketing campaign last week. It is just a temporary corporate restructuring," Vanessa stammered, her eyes darting frantically around the dining room, looking for an escape route. The global market shifted. It is totally normal in the competitive beauty industry. Spencer was going to inject some heavy capital from his investment fund to keep us afloat until the big rebrand launches next spring. "Spencer does not have any capital to inject," I reminded her, keeping my tone clinical and relentless. "He is completely broke. You are completely broke. Your entire life is an exhausting illusion, Vanessa." Vanessa stood up straight, throwing her shoulders back defensively. "I am not broke," she shot back, gesturing wildly to her expensive outfit and the pristine designer bag sitting on the chair next to her. "Do these look like the clothes of a broke woman, Morgan? Spencer and I just spent 2 weeks at an exclusive private resort in the Maldives. I carry a Birkin bag that costs more than your entire car. You are just trying to make me look bad in front of Mom and Dad because you have never owned anything nice in your entire pathetic life." I looked at the Birkin bag resting on the chair. It was genuine crocodile leather, flawless, wildly expensive. I looked back up at the golden child who was still desperately clinging to her false reality. "Oh, I know exactly how much that bag costs, Vanessa," I said softly. "And I know exactly how much that luxury trip to the Maldives cost. But the question Mom and Dad should be asking right now is not how much those shiny things cost. The question they need to ask themselves is who actually paid for them." Vanessa's face went completely ashen. Her jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. She took a small, unsteady step backward, bumping into her chair. "You see, Mom?" I continued, shifting my gaze to the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was a burden. Vanessa did not buy those designer bags with profits from her failed cosmetics business, and Spencer did not pay for those luxury vacations with his non-existent investment returns. They paid for that extravagant lifestyle using your money. "My money?" my mother echoed, looking completely lost and disoriented. "What do you mean, my money, Morgan?" "We only gave her the initial seed money for the business 5 years ago. We have not given her a dime since then." I sighed, feeling a heavy, strange weight of pity for the two deeply flawed people who had blindly enabled this monster. "6 months ago, Vanessa came to the house while you and Dad were out playing golf," I explained. "She told the housekeeper she needed to grab some old childhood photos from the safe in the study. But she did not take photos, Mom. She took your personal financial records. She took the account numbers and the routing information for your primary retirement portfolio. My father shook his head vigorously, refusing to believe his own ears. No! He barked, his voice cracking with terror. That is completely impossible. The bank would have notified us immediately. We have security measures in place. Vanessa would never do something so evil to us. She forged your signatures, Dad, I stated plainly, delivering the final crushing blow. She set up an online portal using a secondary dummy email address, so you would never see the withdrawal alerts or the low balance warnings. I cross-referenced the timestamps on her social media posts with the withdrawal dates on your portfolio statements. It is a perfect match. On March 12th, she posted a picture from a private cabana in Tulum. On March 10th, $12,000 was wired from your Vanguard account to a shell company registered in her name. On April 5th, she posted an unboxing video of a limited edition Cartier watch. On April 3rd, $18,000 vanished from your life savings. The dining room was dead silent. Over the past 6 months, she has systematically drained your entire retirement account, I said. Every single time she needed to post a new glamorous photo on the internet to maintain her fake influencer status, she stole another $10,000 from your future. That Birkin bag sitting on that chair right now, that is your retirement fund. That trip to the Maldives, that was the money you saved for your medical care. My father turned slowly to look at his precious golden child. His face was a mask of pure, absolute agony. The daughter he worshipped, the daughter he had just gifted my home to, had robbed him blind. Vanessa. He whispered, his voice breaking completely. Please tell me she is lying. Please tell me you did not steal our future. Vanessa started to cry again, but these were not the fake, calculated crocodile tears she had used earlier to gain sympathy. This was the ugly, desperate, hyperventilating sobbing of a cornered thief. I had to, she wailed, dropping to her knees right there on the expensive rug. I had to keep up appearances, Dad. You do not understand the immense pressure of being an influencer. People expect me to look a certain way. If I admitted the business failed, everyone would laugh at me. I was going to pay you back, I swear. Spencer promised me his next big real estate deal would cover everything I took. My mother let out a horrific, gut-wrenching scream. She lunged out of her chair and grabbed the Birkin bag from the seat. She threw it violently at Vanessa, the heavy leather striking her sister hard in the shoulder. You stole from us! My mother shrieked, her face contorted with absolute devastation. We gave you everything. We gave you our whole lives, and you stole our future just to buy a stupid purse. I sat there and calmly watched the beautiful, perfect facade of my family completely disintegrate into dust. The golden child was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, surrounded by the symbols of her fake wealth. The wealthy son-in-law was backed against the wall, waiting in terror for the federal agents to arrive, and my parents were finally realizing that the daughter they worshipped was a vicious parasite, and the daughter they despised was the only one holding the truth. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the dining room was the pathetic whimpering of my sister on the floor. I watched my parents' faces, expecting to see the final dawn of realization. I expected an apology. I expected them to turn their backs on the two frauds who had just destroyed their retirement and sold their future for designer handbags and fake status. But I had completely underestimated the sheer power of their toxic delusion. My father, Desmond, took a deep, shuddering breath and slowly knelt down next to Vanessa. He did not push her away in disgust. Instead, he awkwardly patted her perfectly styled hair. Then he stood back up, his face hardening into a familiar mask of stubborn pride. He stepped completely over the expensive Birkin bag on the floor and positioned his large body between Vanessa and me as if he needed to protect her from a dangerous predator. How long have you known about this, Morgan? He asked, his voice dangerously low and trembling with misdirected anger. How long have you been spying on your own sister like some kind of cold-blooded snake? I blinked, genuinely thrown off balance by the absurdity of his question. I just told you that she stole your entire life savings, Dad, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly steady. I told you she forged your signature and robbed you blind to pay for luxury vacations. And your very first reaction is to ask how long I have known about it. My mother Brenda wiped her face with the back of her hand completely, ignoring the fact that her financial security had just been liquidated. You had no right, she snapped, taking an aggressive step toward me. You had absolutely no right to hack into our private bank accounts and stalk your sister's social media. You violated our privacy, Morgan. You did all of this just to humiliate her on our anniversary and make yourself look important. The cognitive dissonance was absolutely breathtaking. They were literally bleeding out financially, and yet they were screaming at the person who was trying to apply the tourniquet. They would rather excuse a massive felony committed by their golden child than admit that their scapegoat daughter had been right all along. I did not hack into anything, Mom, I explained patiently as if speaking to a stubborn child. As a federal agent, I have legal clearance to run financial audits when I suspect a crime. I was trying to protect you from losing everything. Protect us. My father scoffed, his chest puffing out again, as he desperately tried to regain control of his shattered narrative. You are not protecting us. You are destroying this family. Vanessa made a mistake. Yes. She panicked because of the heavy pressures of running a business. But she is family. She was just taking an advance on her inheritance. We do not call federal authorities on our own flesh and blood. We handle things privately. He turned to look at Spencer, who was still plastered against the wall, sweating completely through his expensive tailored shirt. Spencer is a brilliant financial mind. My father declared, his voice shaking with forced conviction. He manages a massive fund. He knows how to move capital around the global market. He will fix this little mistake. He will make the money back and replenish our accounts tenfold. He is a genius, Morgan. That is something you would never understand with your rigid little government rulebook. Spencer nodded frantically, eager to latch onto this lifeline of pure, unadulterated delusion. Yes, absolutely, Desmond, he stammered, wiping his forehead with a trembling hand. It was just a temporary cash flow issue, a minor liquidity crunch. The market has been highly volatile lately, but I have several massive commercial deals closing next quarter. I will pay back every single cent Vanessa borrowed from your accounts. You have my word as a gentleman. Borrowed. I repeated the word, tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. She did not borrow it, Spencer. She stole it. And you cannot pay it back because your accounts do not exist anymore. As of 6 o'clock this morning, my federal task force has completely frozen every single asset tied to your name. You do not have a dime left to your name. My mother shook her head vigorously, putting her hands over her ears, refusing to hear the cold, hard truth. Stop it, Morgan, she shrieked, her face red with irrational fury. Just stop lying right now. You are just a vindictive monster trying to tear their marriage apart. Spencer is going to fix this. He is going to take care of us like he always promised. He is the successful son we never had. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who wants everyone else to be as thoroughly miserable as you are. I looked at the two people who had raised me and felt a profound, chilling emptiness. They were actively choosing poverty over humility. They were choosing the comfortable illusion of a perfect, wealthy family over the devastating reality sitting right in front of them. They were completely willing to live in a fantasy world where Spencer was a misunderstood billionaire and Vanessa was a tragic victim of circumstance. They would rather drown with the golden child than be saved by the daughter they hated. You really believe he can save you? I asked, my voice softening into a tone of genuine pity. You really believe the man who forged your signature to take out a $4 million second mortgage on this house is going to magically conjure up the money he already lost in his Ponzi scheme? My father pointed his thick finger at the front door, his face purple with absolute rage. Get out, he roared. I told you earlier that you had 2 hours, but I am changing my mind. Get out of my house right this second. You are dead to us, Morgan. You are no longer a part of this family. We will figure this entire situation out together without your toxic interference. Spencer will handle the bank. He will handle the mortgage paperwork. You just pack your bags and leave us alone forever. He still thought the house belonged to him. He still thought he had the ultimate authority to order me around and dictate the terms of my existence. He was so blinded by his hatred for me and his desperate love for Vanessa that he had completely forgotten about the thick manila envelope still sitting untouched on the dining table. The envelope that I had practically begged him to open earlier. The envelope that held the absolute final nail in the coffin of his delusional, fragile world. I did not move a single muscle toward the door. I just sat there in the tense silence, letting his cruel words hang in the heavy air of the dining room. "You want me to leave, Dad?" I asked, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of Vanessa's pathetic sobbing on the floor. "I will gladly leave. I have been wanting to leave this toxic environment for years. I am tired of being the scapegoat in this family. I am tired of fixing your mistakes. But before I go upstairs and pack my bags, I really think you should look at what is inside that envelope." My father glared at me, his chest heaving with exertion from his screaming fit. He looked down at the dining table. The thick manila envelope was still sitting exactly where I had placed it earlier, right next to the shredded pieces of Spencer's insulting relocation check. For a brief moment, my father hesitated. The absolute certainty in his eyes flickered. Maybe some deeply buried instinct was finally telling him that he was making a catastrophic mistake by pushing me away. Spencer pushed himself away from the dining room wall, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. "Desmond, do not open that," he blurted out, his voice cracking with pure panic. "It is just fake government documents. She is trying to trick you. She is just trying to play sick mind games with us because she is jealous. Just throw the envelope in the trash and call the police like you promised. Get her out of here before she ruins the whole night." But Spencer's desperate interruption had the exact opposite effect. My father was a man of immense stubborn pride. He absolutely hated being told what to do, especially by someone else in his own home. And he was still completely convinced that he held all the power in the room. He scoffed at Spencer, shaking his head dismissively. "I am not afraid of her stupid mind games," my father said, grabbing the thick envelope with his large hands. "I want to see exactly what kind of pathetic lies she had to forge to try and ruin this family. I want proof of her insanity before I have the cops drag her out." He ripped open the top flap of the manila envelope. The sound of tearing paper echoed sharply across the silent dining room. He reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents. He flipped to the first page, expecting to see a fake property deed or some meaningless financial spreadsheet. But there was no property deed inside. There was no title transfer. The very first page bore the heavy embossed seal of the United States Department of Justice. Right below the federal seal in bold black letters was a title that made my father's eyes widen in absolute sheer horror. "Notice of Federal Asset Seizure and Forfeiture." My father stared at the paper, his lips moving silently as he tried to comprehend the dense legal jargon printed on the page. His large hands began to shake so violently that the papers rustled loudly against each other. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice entirely stripped of its former booming authority. "What does this mean, Morgan?" "It means exactly what it says, Dad," I replied, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms over my chest. "It means that this $4 million historic mansion in Buckhead no longer belongs to you. The house you have spent the last 30 years bragging about at the country club is gone. It does not belong to Mom, and it certainly does not belong to Vanessa and Spencer." I looked at my mother, who was still kneeling on the floor, clutching the stolen designer bag next to Vanessa. Then I looked back up at my father, locking eyes with the man who had just threatened to have me arrested. "30 minutes ago, you stood up and smiled at me," I said, my voice echoing the exact words from the beginning of the dinner. "You told me that this was my last meal in this house." "Well, I slid that envelope across the table for a reason, Dad. Because this is your last meal in this house, too." My parents read the document again. Their eyes darted back and forth across the terrifying federal letterhead. Then they read it a third time, trying desperately to find a loophole or a mistake. The color drained completely from both of their faces, leaving them looking like hollowed-out ghosts. My father dropped the heavy stack of papers onto the table, as if they had suddenly caught fire and burned his fingers. "You cannot do this," he stammered, taking a stumbling step backward away from the table. "This is my house. I paid for this house with my own hard-earned money. You have no right to seize my property. You cannot just take my home away from me." "I am not the one seizing it, Dad," I explained, keeping my tone entirely clinical and detached. "The federal government is seizing it because Spencer used this exact property as collateral for his fraudulent investment fund. He forged your signature on a massive second mortgage and pumped that $4 million directly into his collapsing Ponzi scheme. When the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force froze all of Spencer's offshore and domestic assets this morning, this house was automatically included in the seizure order. The government considers this estate to be the direct proceeds of a federal financial crime." My mother let out another agonizing wail, dropping the designer bag onto the rug. "No!" she cried out, scrambling awkwardly to her feet. "No, Desmond, tell her she is wrong. Tell her we are protected by the law. We did not commit any crimes. We are innocent victims in all of this. They cannot take our family home away from us. We will hire lawyers. We will fight this in court." I shook my head slowly, feeling a cold sense of absolute finality settling over the dining room. "You are not protected, Mom," I said softly, "and you cannot hire lawyers to fight this. When Vanessa stole your retirement savings to buy her fake influencer lifestyle, she wiped out the very last safety net you had left. You have zero liquid assets to pay for a legal defense. The bank has already initiated the foreclosure process on your original mortgage because you missed the last 3 monthly payments since Vanessa drained your checking accounts. The federal government is simply stepping in to seize the property before the bank has a chance to auction it off to the highest bidder." My father collapsed heavily into his chair at the head of the table. It was the exact same chair where he had sat like a proud king just an hour ago, dispensing his cruel judgments and handing my home over to his golden child. But now he looked completely and utterly broken. His broad shoulders slumped forward, and his hands trembled helplessly in his lap. All of his arrogance, all of his stubborn pride, all of his toxic authority had been completely stripped away by a single stack of federal papers. He slowly turned his head to look at Spencer. He looked at the man he had chosen over his own flesh and blood, the man he had trusted to elevate the family name and bring them incredible wealth. Spencer could not even meet his eyes. The wealthy, arrogant outsider was staring blankly at the floor, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths as he realized the absolute totality of his defeat. He had tried to humiliate me with a measly $5,000 check, and in return, I had completely dismantled his entire fraudulent life and taken away the only sanctuary he had left to hide in. The grand illusion was finally over. The perfect, wealthy Buckhead family was officially dead. They were standing in a massive mansion they no longer owned, surrounded by stolen luxury goods they could not afford, facing a terrifying reality they could no longer deny. And the daughter they had spent a lifetime treating like absolute garbage was the only one holding the keys to the kingdom. My father stared at the thick stack of federal papers on the table. His eyes glazed over with a look of complete cognitive collapse. He slowly dragged his gaze up from the documents and locked eyes with Spencer. The silence in the room was suffocating. It was the kind of heavy, terrifying silence that only happens when a person's entire reality is completely shattered. How my father finally whispered, his voice barely audible over Vanessa's quiet sobbing on the floor. "How could you possibly take out a mortgage on our home, Spencer? The bank knows me. The bank holds the original deed. You are not on the title." Spencer opened his mouth, but his throat was completely dry. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, but no words came out. He just backed further against the dining room wall, looking like a terrified child. "I will tell you exactly how he did it, Dad," I said, leaning forward and resting my hands on the polished wood of the table. "Because tracking down the mechanics of his fraud is exactly what took my federal team 8 months to build. Spencer is not a financial genius. He is not a Wall Street mastermind. He is just a pathetic, desperate con artist running a classic textbook Ponzi scheme." I turned my attention directly to Spencer, dissecting his entire life with cold, clinical precision. "You see, Dad, a Ponzi scheme requires a constant, continuous flow of new money to survive. Spencer promised his elite clients massive, unrealistic returns on their real estate investments, but he never actually bought any commercial properties. He just took their cash and spent it on himself. He bought his custom suits, he leased his sports cars, and he funded Vanessa's fake empire." My mother let out a small, painful gasp, but I did not stop. When his early investors started asking for their promised quarterly dividends, Spencer had to find new victims. I continued, my voice steady and relentless. "He used your country club connections, Dad. He used the church congregation. He took new money to pay the old investors, keeping the illusion alive just a little bit longer. But eventually, he ran out of gullible rich friends. The well ran completely dry. People wanted their money back, and Spencer was completely out of cash." "He was desperate," my father muttered, staring blankly at the wall. "He was drowning," I corrected him. "He was facing dozens of lawsuits from angry, aggressive investors. So he looked for the biggest, most easily accessible asset he could find. And that asset was this $4 million mansion." I picked up the federal seizure notice and flipped to the third page, sliding it across the table toward my father. "Look at the date on that loan origination document, Dad. November 24th of last year. Does that date sound familiar to you?" My father squinted at the paper, his hands trembling violently. "November 24th. He repeated, his voice hollow. "That was Thanksgiving." "Exactly," I said, nodding slowly. "Do you remember Thanksgiving morning, Dad? Do you remember when Spencer came into your home office with a thick stack of investment paperwork? He told you he was moving some of your retirement funds into a highly exclusive, tax-sheltered trust? He said it was a time-sensitive opportunity, and he needed your signature on a dozen different pages right away." My father's face contorted in absolute agony as the memory suddenly clicked into place. "He handed me a pen." My father whispered, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes and rolling down his weathered cheek. "He poured me a glass of scotch and handed me a pen. He told me not to worry about reading the fine print, because he was family, and he would always protect my assets. He slipped the second mortgage application right into the middle of that stack," I said, delivering the brutal truth. "He buried it between fake tax disclosures and dummy investment contracts. You and Mom signed your names exactly where he pointed. You signed away the equity of your home without even reading the header of the document." "But a mortgage requires a notary," my father weakly protested, clinging to one last desperate shred of logic. "The bank requires a verified witness. Spencer has a buddy from his old fraternity who lost his real estate license 5 years ago for ethical violations," I explained. "That buddy still has an active notary stamp. Spencer paid him $20,000 cash to fraudulently stamp your signatures on the mortgage documents. The bank processed the paperwork because your credit history was flawless, and the signatures were technically authentic. 3 days later, $4 million was wired directly into a corporate account controlled entirely by Spencer." Vanessa let out a loud, horrific wail from the floor. $4 million, she screamed, looking up at her husband with absolute pure hatred. "Where is it, Spencer? Where did you put $4 million? Spencer flinched, covering his face with his trembling hands. "I had to pay them," he sobbed, his arrogant facade completely shattered. "The early investors were threatening to go to the police, Vanessa. They were going to expose the whole fund. I had to give them their capital back to keep them quiet. I just needed a little more time to close a legitimate deal." I was going to pay your parents back with the profits. I swear to God I was going to pay them back. There were no legitimate deals. Spencer, I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a knife. You are not an investor. You are a degenerate gambler playing roulette with other people's lives. You took that $4 million and you burned through it in less than 6 months. You routed the funds through 3 different shell companies registered in Delaware just to pay off the loudest investors to avoid prison. And then you took Vanessa to the Maldives to celebrate while my parents' bank accounts were being actively drained to zero. I paused, letting the ultimate irony sink in for all of them. Do you want to know the sickest part of this entire web of lies, Dad? I asked. Spencer had to make monthly payments on that fraudulent $4 million loan to keep the bank from notifying you. But since he was completely broke, he forced Vanessa to steal from your retirement accounts. Vanessa stole your life savings to buy her designer bags, and Spencer secretly took a cut of that stolen money to pay the fake mortgage on the house he stole from you. Your own money was being used to fund your own destruction. My mother slowly pulled herself up from the floor, clutching the edge of the table to support her shaking body. She looked at Spencer as if she was staring at a literal demon. You sat at my table every Sunday, she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. You ate my food, you smiled in my face and called me Mom, and the entire time you were plotting to steal the roof over my head. I did not want to hurt you, Brenda Spencer pleaded, taking a small, pathetic step toward her. I love this family. I just made a bad calculation in the market. It was just a business mistake. A business mistake? I repeated, a harsh laugh escaping my lips. Forging federal loan documents is not a business mistake, Spencer. It is a Class B felony. Money laundering is a federal crime. Wire fraud is a federal crime. You did not make a miscalculation. You executed a highly coordinated criminal conspiracy against the very people who welcomed you into their home. I looked around the dining room. The crystal chandeliers were still shining brightly over the spilled red wine and the torn pieces of the $5,000 check Spencer had thrown at me. The absolute irony of the entire situation was staggering. They had all sat here completely convinced of their own superiority, ready to throw me out onto the street. And now they were the ones who had absolutely nothing left. My father buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, agonizing sobs. He had lost his life savings. He had lost his beautiful, historic home. He had lost his standing in the community. And worst of all, he had lost his pride. The golden child had robbed him, and the perfect son-in-law had destroyed him. The Ponzi scheme was fully decoded, and the toxic foundation of our family was completely reduced to rubble. But Spencer was not ready to surrender just yet. The human mind has a terrifying capacity for denial, especially when faced with the complete destruction of its own ego. He suddenly pushed himself away from the wall, shaking his head violently back and forth. Drops of sweat flew from his forehead, landing on the polished wood floor. "No!" he shouted, his voice cracking like a desperate teenager. "No, this is all a lie. Desmond, you have to listen to me. She is twisting the facts to make me look bad. The fund is fine. The mortgage is fine. I just moved the equity into a temporary holding trust to protect it from capital gains taxes. It is a highly sophisticated maneuver." My father looked up at him, his eyes completely dead. "A holding trust," my father repeated hollowly. "Yes," Spencer stammered, wiping his face with the sleeve of his expensive suit jacket. "Yes, exactly. The federal government does not understand high-level private equity. They see a complex transaction and they immediately assume it is fraud. That seizure notice is just a preliminary inquiry. I have lawyers. The best lawyers in the city. I will make one phone call and this whole misunderstanding will disappear by tomorrow morning." He looked at Vanessa, who was still kneeling on the rug, clutching her stomach. "Tell them, Vanessa," he pleaded. "Tell them I always have a plan. I just need to restructure the debt. I just need a few days to liquidate some secondary assets, And I can pay off the entire bank loan. We will get the house back. Everything will be exactly like it was. Vanessa just stared at him, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black lines. She did not say a word. She finally saw him for exactly what he was. Restructure the debt. I echoed my voice cutting through his frantic rambling. Liquidate secondary assets. Spencer. You really do not know when to stop digging, do you? You are standing at the bottom of a grave, and you are still asking for a bigger shovel. I reached into my leather work bag one more time. My parents and Spencer watched my hand with wide, terrified eyes, as if I was reaching into a cage full of venomous snakes. They had already seen the federal badge. They had already seen the asset seizure notice. They had absolutely no idea what other horrors could possibly be lurking in that bag. I pulled out a second stack of papers. These were not printed on official government letterhead. They were bound in a thick blue legal folder, the kind used for high-level corporate transactions. "What is that?" my mother whispered, shrinking back in her chair. "This is reality," I said softly, placing the blue folder on the table right next to the federal seizure notice. "Spencer claims he is going to call his lawyers and negotiate with the bank to get this house back. He claims he just needs a few days to restructure his debt. But there is a massive flaw in that brilliant plan, Spencer." Spencer stared at the blue folder, his chest heaving. "What flaw?" he choked out. "The bank does not own the original debt on this property anymore," I explained, tapping the cover of the folder with my index finger. When Vanessa drained Mom and Dad's retirement accounts, they missed 3 consecutive payments on their primary mortgage. Banks do not like missed payments. They especially do not like missed payments on properties that are suddenly flagged by federal investigators for secondary mortgage fraud. Banks like to mitigate their risk. So when a property becomes too toxic, they sell the distressed debt to private equity firms at a heavy discount. Spencer blinked furiously, trying to process the corporate finance logic through his sheer panic. "So, what?" he snapped. "So a private wealth management firm bought the debt. I know all the major players in the Atlanta private equity market. I can negotiate with them. I can offer them a premium to buy back the deed. Who bought it, Morgan? What is the name of the firm?" I slowly opened the blue folder and turned it around so he could read the bold print on the first page. "The firm is called Apex Financial Holdings," I said. Spencer frowned, squinting at the paper. "Apex Financial," he muttered. "I have never heard of them. Who runs it? Who is the managing partner?" I leaned back in my chair and looked at him with a completely blank expression. "I am," I replied. The silence returned, hitting the room like a physical blow. "What?" My father whispered, his voice barely carrying across the table. "I am the sole proprietor and managing director of Apex Financial Holdings," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It is a private wealth management firm I quietly established 5 years ago, using the money I made from consulting on federal financial crime cases. I specialize in purchasing distressed assets and defaulted mortgages." I looked at my father, who was staring at me as if I had just grown wings. "When the bank flagged your primary mortgage for default 3 weeks ago, my firm made an aggressive cash offer to purchase the debt outright," I explained. The bank was thrilled to wash their hands of the massive liability Spencer had created. "The transaction cleared yesterday afternoon." "You bought our debt?" My mother gasped, clutching her chest. "You own the mortgage." "No, Mom," I corrected her gently. "You defaulted on the mortgage. The federal government seized the fraudulent second loan Spencer created, but my firm legally purchased the primary defaulted note, which means I do not just own the debt, I own the actual property. I own the house." Spencer let out a bizarre, strangled noise that sounded like a dying animal. He staggered backward until his back hit the wall, sliding down slowly, until he was sitting on the floor next to a very expensive antique vase. "You," he whispered, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. "You bought the house." "Yes, Spencer," I said. "I bought the house. You stood there 10 minutes ago, bragging about your fake millions and telling me to go rent a tiny apartment in a bad neighborhood." You tried to hand me a $5,000 check to leave a property that you secretly stole from my parents. But the entire time you were making those arrogant little threats, you were actually standing in my dining room. My father looked from me to Spencer and then down at the blue folder. The absolute finality of the situation crushed whatever tiny ounce of fight he had left in his body. The daughter he had treated like a burden. The daughter he had literally just ordered to pack her bags and get off his property was now his legal landlord, and the son-in-law he had worshipped had literally handed her the keys. "You see, Spencer," I said, standing up slowly from the table. "You thought you were the smartest person in the room. You thought you could manipulate my family, steal their money, and use my home to fund your pathetic criminal lifestyle. But you forgot the golden rule of accounting. Every transaction leaves a paper trail, and I have been following yours for a very long time." My mother began to cry softly, her tears dropping onto the polished wood of the dining table. It was a pathetic sound, completely devoid of the righteous anger she had displayed just an hour ago. She was mourning the loss of her wealthy illusion. She was mourning the loss of her country club status. But looking at her, I knew she was not actually mourning the relationship she had destroyed with me. "Dad," I said, turning to the broken man at the head of the table, "you told me I had 2 hours to get off your property. I am going to be much more generous than that. I am going to give all of you exactly 24 hours to pack your things and vacate my property." My father slowly looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "Morgan, please," he croaked out, his voice breaking. "Please do not do this. This is our home. We have nowhere else to go. Vanessa has a baby coming. Please, you cannot just throw us out onto the street." I looked at the man who had stood by and watched his golden child strip away my dignity time and time again. I looked at the man who had smiled while telling me to eat my last meal in this house. "I am not throwing you out, Dad," I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "Spencer and Vanessa threw you out the moment they decided to steal your future. I am just the new owner taking possession of my asset. The 2 hours you gave me are officially up. Your 24 hours start right now." I watched the tiny glimmer of hope completely vanish from my father's eyes. He had actually believed that because I was his daughter, I would eventually cave. He thought the natural order of our family hierarchy would somehow magically restore itself. But when he looked into my eyes, he saw absolutely nothing but cold, hard resolve. He let out a low, bitter scoff and muttered something under his breath. It sounded a lot like "ungrateful bitch." I stopped halfway to the dining room exit. I slowly turned around and walked right back to the head of the table. The heavy silence in the room intensified. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "I just changed my mind. 24 hours is entirely too generous for a group of people who were perfectly happy to throw me out onto the street without a single second of hesitation." My father looked up, his eyes widening in fresh panic. "What are you saying?" he rasped. I rested my hands flat on the polished wood of the table, leaning down so my face was only inches from his. "I am going to throw your exact words right back at you," I whispered. 30 minutes ago, you stood there and proudly declared that this was my last meal in this house. Well, the tables have completely turned. This house does not belong to you anymore, Dad. It belongs to me. So this is your last meal in this house. All of you." My mother let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. "You have exactly 2 hours to pack your trash before the authorities arrive," I stated, standing back up and crossing my arms. 120 minutes to gather whatever clothes and personal items you can fit into your suitcases. And then I want all 4 of you completely off my property. You cannot do this to us," my mother wailed, her voice echoing shrilly off the crystal chandeliers. "Morgan, please be reasonable. It is dark outside. Where are we supposed to go? The neighbors will see us dragging our bags out to the street. We will be completely humiliated." I looked at my mother with a mixture of absolute pity and deep disgust. Even now, standing in the smoldering wreckage of her entire life, her biggest concern was what the wealthy neighbors would think. She was more worried about the country club gossip than the fact that she was entirely broke and homeless. "That is really not my problem, Mom," I replied smoothly. "Maybe you can call some of your friends at the country club and ask to sleep on their couch. Or maybe Spencer can use his brilliant financial algorithms to magically conjure up a luxury hotel suite for you. But you are not staying here." My father suddenly slammed his fist on the table again, but it lacked the terrifying power it had earlier in the evening. It was just the weak, pathetic gesture of a defeated old man. "You are a monster," he croaked out, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face. "You are a cold-blooded monster. We raised you, we fed you, and you are kicking us out like stray dogs." "I did not kick you out, Dad," I reminded him, pointing a finger at Vanessa and Spencer, who were both cowering near the wall. "They did. Your golden child and your perfect son-in-law stole your house. They stole your retirement. They dug this massive grave and you happily jumped right into it because you were too busy worshiping them to see the truth. I am just the person who bought the graveyard." Vanessa suddenly scrambled to her feet, her designer dress wrinkled and stained with tears. She stumbled toward me, grabbing my arm with her shaking hands. "Morgan, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "Please, you cannot kick me out." "What about the baby?" "I am pregnant. I need a safe place to raise my child. You cannot put a pregnant woman out on the street." I looked down at her hands gripping my sleeve, and then I looked up into her tear-streaked face. I felt absolutely nothing for her, no sisterly bond, no sympathy, nothing. I reached over and firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. "You are going to have to figure that out, Vanessa," I said coldly, "because this estate is no longer your personal piggy bank. And frankly, you should be much more worried about how you are going to raise a child by yourself when your husband gets transferred to a federal penitentiary." At the mention of prison, Spencer let out a loud, miserable groan from the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in his arms, completely shutting down. He had finally realized that there was no fancy corporate loophole that could save him. His fake empire was entirely gone, and the federal agents were already on their way. My father tried to stand up to use his physical size to intimidate me one last time, but his legs were shaking too badly. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. "Morgan, please," he whispered, his voice entirely broken. "We can work this out. We are family. We can sign a lease. We can pay you rent. Just give us a chance to make this right." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Rent?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You want to pay me rent with what money, Dad? Vanessa drained your checking accounts. Spencer drained your savings. You do not have a single dime to your name. And even if you did, I would never let you stay. For 30 years, you made me feel like an unwanted guest in my own family. You constantly told me I was a burden. You let Spencer humiliate me at this very table just 30 minutes ago. You made your choice." I looked at the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner of the dining room. The brass pendulum swung back and forth, ticking away the seconds in the heavy silence. "It is 8:15, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "The Atlanta police and the federal agents will be pulling through the front gates at exactly 10:15. If you are still inside my house when they get here, I will press charges for criminal trespassing." I took a step back, surveying the ruined family sitting among the expensive china and the spilled wine. And just to be absolutely clear, I added, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are only allowed to take your clothes and your personal toiletries. Do not even think about packing any jewelry, artwork, or expensive electronics. You do not own the furniture. You do not own the silver. Everything of value in this house now belongs to the estate to help pay off the massive mountains of debt your precious golden child created. If I see anyone trying to sneak out with anything else, I will add theft to the police report." The room fell completely silent again. My father buried his face in his hands, sobbing openly. My mother stared blankly at the wall, completely paralyzed by shock. Vanessa slid back down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth in total disbelief. And Spencer just sat there waiting for the inevitable sound of the police sirens. I turned my back on all of them and walked calmly out of the dining room. The ultimate payoff was finally complete. I had taken back my power, my dignity, and my home. And I left them with exactly what they deserved. Nothing. I made it exactly 3 steps into the grand marble hallway before the sheer weight of reality finally crashed down on the dining room behind me. I did not keep walking toward the front door. Instead, I stopped and turned around, standing quietly in the shadows of the arched doorway. I could not resist watching the final act of this miserable play. The toxic alliance that had spent my entire life trying to destroy my self-worth was about to completely cannibalize itself. My father was staring at the empty archway where I had just been standing. His chest was heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. He slowly turned his massive head to look down at Spencer. Spencer was still sitting on the floor next to the antique vase, looking like a terrified little boy. The illusion of the wealthy, successful white son-in-law was entirely gone. There was no expensive watch or custom-tailored suit that could cover up the fact that he was just a common thief. My father stood up from his chair. He did not look like an old, defeated man anymore. He looked like a cornered animal that had just realized it was caught in a trap set by its own master. All the blind worship, all the desperate social climbing, and all the pathetic country club bragging had led him directly to this exact moment of total ruin. "You stole it," my father whispered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You stole my legacy, Spencer." Spencer scrambled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping frantically on the polished wood floor. "Desmond, please calm down," he pleaded, holding both of his hands up in a defensive gesture. "We can fix this. We can call my firm. I have partners who can float us a loan." "There are no partners," my father roared, his voice suddenly exploding with absolute rage. "There is no firm. There is no loan. You took my family wealth. You took the house I bought with my own sweat and blood, and you gambled it away on your pathetic little schemes." My father lunged forward. He crossed the dining room in 2 massive strides and grabbed Spencer by the collar of his silk shirt. He hauled the younger man up from the floor with a terrifying surge of adrenaline. Spencer's feet actually dangled off the ground for a fraction of a second. My father slammed him hard against the expensive floral wallpaper. "Dad, stop!" Vanessa screamed, scrambling up from the rug. "Dad, you are going to hurt him." My father did not even look at his golden child. His eyes were bulging with pure, unadulterated fury. He shook Spencer violently, making the younger man's head snap back and forth. "I vouched for you." My father spat saliva flying from his lips. "I introduced you to my friends. I let you marry my daughter. I treated you like a king in my own home. I gave you everything, and you used my own name to rob me blind." Spencer gagged, trying to pry my father's thick fingers off his throat. The polite, respectful facade that Spencer had worn for the last 2 years completely melted away. The charming smile and the corporate jargon vanished. The entitled, arrogant man underneath finally clawed his way to the surface. "Get your hands off me, you crazy old man," Spencer choked out, his face turning a dark shade of purple. Spencer brought his knee up hard, driving it directly into my father's stomach. My father let out a sharp gasp of pain, and his grip loosened just enough. Spencer shoved him with all of his remaining strength. My father stumbled backward, his heavy boots catching on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. He crashed hard into the dining table, sending the crystal glasses and the remaining plates crashing to the floor in a shower of shattered glass and porcelain. "Desmond!" my mother shrieked, rushing forward to help him up. She looked at Spencer with absolute horror. "How could you do that to him?" she cried. "He is your father-in-law." "He is a gullible idiot," Spencer snarled, smoothing down his ruined silk shirt and gasping for air. "You all are. You were so desperate to have a wealthy white investment banker in your family that you practically handed me the keys to your bank accounts. You wanted the country club status so badly, you did not even bother to read the contracts you were signing. You did this to yourselves." Vanessa stood frozen in the center of the ruined dining room. She looked at the husband she had worshipped. She looked at the man who was supposed to fund her lavish lifestyle and elevate her influencer brand forever. "You used me," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute disbelief. "You never loved me. You just used me to get to my parents' money." Spencer let out a harsh, cruel laugh. "Love you," he mocked, shaking his head in disgust. "You are a bankrupt failure, Vanessa. Your cosmetics company was a complete joke. You spent your entire day taking selfies and pretending to be famous while I was desperately trying to keep us out of federal prison. We used each other. You wanted my fake money to buy your designer bags, and I needed your parents' real money to pay off my debts. We are exactly the same." Vanessa let out a high-pitched, hysterical scream. It was a sound of pure psychological collapse. She threw herself at Spencer, her perfectly manicured nails curled into claws. She hit his chest. She scratched at his face. She tore at his clothes. "You ruined my life," she wailed, hitting him over and over again. "You ruined my baby. You ruined everything." Spencer grabbed her wrists, pushing her away roughly. "Get off me, you crazy bitch!" he shouted. "Do not try to act like the innocent victim now. You stole from them too. You drained their retirement accounts to buy your stupid shoes. You are going to federal prison right next to me." The toxic alliance had completely shattered. The perfect family was entirely destroyed. They were standing in the middle of a literal pile of broken glass, screaming at each other, physically assaulting each other, and tearing each other to pieces. The unconditional loyalty they had always demanded from me was nowhere to be found among themselves. When the fake money ran out and the luxurious facade cracked, their true vicious nature was fully exposed. My father had spent his entire life building an image. He wanted the world to see him as a powerful patriarch. He thought Spencer was the ultimate prize, a son-in-law who could navigate the corporate world and bring elite status back to our family. My father had sacrificed his own daughter just to appease this arrogant outsider. And now that outsider had physically assaulted him in his own home. Spencer was not finished. He looked around at the three of them with a sneer of pure contempt. "I am not taking the fall for this alone," Spencer said, his voice echoing in the ruined room. "When the federal agents interrogate me, I am telling them exactly where the rest of the money went. I am telling them about your secret accounts, Vanessa. I am telling them how Desmond signed those papers without doing a single ounce of due diligence. We are all going down together." My father was struggling to stand up, clutching his stomach while my mother sobbed hysterically beside him. Vanessa was hyperventilating on the floor, crying over the loss of her fake empire and her impending criminal charges. And Spencer was pacing back and forth, looking at his ruined suit and his ruined life with a look of absolute panic. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching them destroy the very last shreds of their dignity. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the need to rush in and play the peacemaker. I had spent 30 years trying to save them from themselves, and they had only ever punished me for it. Now they were finally facing the consequences of their own greed and their own arrogance. Spencer shoved Vanessa away from him one final time with such terrifying force that she slid across the polished hardwood floor. He stood up, his chest heaving heavily, his expensive tailored suit completely ruined by her scratching nails and the spilled wine. The panic that had been suffocating him for the last 30 minutes suddenly twisted into something much darker and far more vicious. The polite progressive mask he had worn since the day he met my sister completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. He looked down at the family he had systematically destroyed and let out a vicious guttural laugh that made my blood run cold. "Stop crying, you pathetic losers," Spencer spat, his voice dripping with a toxic venom I had never heard from him before. "You think you are victims here. You think I manipulated you. You did this to yourselves because you are nothing but stupid, status-obsessed black people." The horrific words hit the dining room like a physical shockwave. My father, who had been clutching his injured stomach, stopped moving entirely. My mother let out a strangled gasp, her eyes wide with absolute disbelief. Spencer paced back and forth, kicking at the shattered pieces of fine china on the rug. You made it so incredibly easy, he mocked, gesturing wildly at the opulent dining room and the crystal chandeliers. You were so desperately hungry for white validation. You wanted a wealthy white son-in-law so badly, just to parade me around your little exclusive country club, to prove to all your rich friends that you had finally made it to the top of the social ladder. All I had to do was wear a custom Italian suit, drop a few corporate buzzwords, and smile at your dinner parties. You handed me your generational wealth and your life savings on a silver platter because you were too busy worshipping the color of my skin and the illusion of my success to actually read the legal contracts you were signing. He stopped pacing and pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at my father's face. You thought you were a powerful patriarch, Desmond. You thought you were a brilliant man who commanded respect. But you are just a gullible old fool who sold out his own flesh and blood for a seat at a table that was never built for you. You sat here and let me disrespect your youngest daughter right in front of your face because you were absolutely terrified I would take away your precious social status. You traded your real family for a fake Rolex and a few designer labels. You disgust me. My father let out a sound that I can only describe as a dying soul leaving a body. He dropped heavily onto his knees, right there in the middle of the ruined dining room. He wrapped his thick arms around his own chest, rocking back and forth in absolute agony. The financial ruin was devastating, but this ultimate humiliation, this vile racial degradation from the man he had practically worshipped, completely broke his spirit into pieces that could never be put back together. My mother covered her ears, sobbing uncontrollably, as the horrifying reality of the monster she had blindly enabled washed over her. They had sacrificed their loyal daughter to a racist con artist who secretly despised their very existence. Vanessa watched her husband deliver his hateful tirade, her eyes wide with sheer terror. She finally realized that Spencer had no secret plan to save her. He was completely unhinged, and he was going down in flames. So she did what she always did when she was cornered. She quickly pivoted her manipulation tactics. She scrambled across the floor, ignoring the sharp shards of broken glass cutting into her bare knees, and grabbed the hem of my professional skirt. I had not moved from the shadows of the hallway, watching the entire horrific scene unfold with absolute emotional detachment. Morgan. Please, Vanessa begged, her voice shrill and desperate as she yanked on my clothes. Please, you have to stop this right now. Call off the federal agents. Tell your boss it was a huge mistake. Tell them Spencer acted entirely alone and forged my name too. I will testify against him in federal court, I swear to God I will. Just let me stay here in the house with you. Please, Morgan, think about the baby. She placed both of her shaking hands over her perfectly flat stomach, looking up at me with wide, terrified, tear-filled eyes. You cannot send a pregnant woman to a federal prison, she sobbed heavily. You cannot let your own niece or nephew be born behind bars in a cold cell. I am your sister Morgan. We share the exact same blood. I will give you everything I have left. I will sign whatever legal documents you want. I will clean the house every day. Just please show some mercy for the sake of my innocent unborn child. My parents stopped crying for a fraction of a second, looking up at me from the floor with a tiny shred of desperate, pathetic hope. Even after everything they had just heard and witnessed, they still desperately wanted to believe in the miracle of Vanessa's baby. They wanted one tiny piece of their perfect family illusion to survive this absolute nightmare. I looked down at my older sister, the golden child who was currently kneeling in the dirt and the broken glass, begging for her life like a trapped rat. I searched my heart, but I felt a deep, cold void exactly where my sympathy should have been. You really are a spectacular actress, Vanessa, I said, my voice echoing softly but firmly in the grand hallway. You almost had Mom and Dad completely convinced earlier this evening. You almost made me look like a heartless monster for stressing out a fragile pregnant woman. I reached down and firmly grabbed her wrists, pulling her hands violently away from her stomach. But you and I both know there is absolutely no baby. I said, looking directly into her panicked, deceitful eyes. Vanessa flinched violently, trying to pull her hands out of my iron grip. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice cracking. "Of course there is a baby. I took a test yesterday. Spencer and I are going to be parents." I let go of her wrists and took a slow, deliberate step backward. "Stop acting, Vanessa," I commanded, my voice hard and entirely unforgiving. "The dramatic performance is officially over, forever. I reviewed your highly confidential medical records as part of the federal financial audit because I needed to track every single dollar you stole. I know exactly where you spent that $30,000 you secretly wired out of Dad's account 2 years ago. You told everyone you were going on a holistic spiritual retreat to Costa Rica. But you actually went to a cheap, uncertified underground clinic in Mexico to get a discounted tummy tuck and extreme liposuction so you could maintain your fake perfect body for your Instagram followers." Vanessa froze completely, her face turning the color of wet ash. My mother slowly lowered her trembling hands from her ears, her eyes darting frantically between us. "The surgery was completely botched, Vanessa." I continued, exposing her deepest, darkest secret to the entire ruined room. "You developed a massive internal infection that nearly killed you. The emergency doctors back here in Atlanta had to perform an emergency hysterectomy just to save your miserable life. You have been completely infertile since you were 28 years old. You have known for 4 entire years that you can never have children." "No," my mother whispered, shaking her head in violent denial. "No, Vanessa. Tell me she is lying right now. Tell me you are really pregnant." Vanessa did not answer our mother. She just stared blankly at the floor, her mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. She had used the fake pregnancy tonight as a calculated tactical weapon. She thought she could use an imaginary child to permanently guarantee her claim to my guest house and cement her status as the ultimate untouchable victim. She never expected that I would have the official medical documents to prove she was a sociopathic liar. "You used a fake baby to try and steal my home," I said, my voice filled with absolute pure disgust. "You manipulated Mom's desperate psychological desire for a grandchild just to cover up the fact that you were robbing her blind to buy designer purses. You even bought fake ultrasound pictures online last week, just in case they asked for proof. You are not a victim, Vanessa. You are just a vicious predator who finally ran out of easy prey." Spencer let out a dark, twisted chuckle from the corner of the room, laughing bitterly at his wife's complete and total exposure. "We really are a perfect match made in heaven, Vanessa," he muttered, wiping a smear of blood from his scratched cheek. "A fake billionaire and a barren influencer." Before Vanessa could even turn around to scream back at her husband, a sudden intense flash of light cut brutally through the darkness of the large dining room windows. The bright strobing flashes of brilliant red and blue painted the interior walls, illuminating the shattered glass, the ruined fine china, and the broken family in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The heavy, intimidating wail of federal sirens pierced the quiet night air of the wealthy Buckhead neighborhood, waking up all the elite neighbors my parents cared so much about. The sound grew louder and louder until it felt like it was shaking the very concrete foundation of the $4 million mansion. Heavy tires screeched to a halt on the long paved driveway outside. Spencer immediately threw himself face down on the dining room floor, interlacing his shaking fingers tightly behind his head. He knew exactly how federal raids worked, and he knew exactly what was coming through that door. Vanessa just sat there, bathed in the flashing police lights, completely paralyzed by the horrifying realization that her glamorous life was entirely over. My father and mother remained on their knees, too, broken, ashamed, and humiliated to even look out the window at the spectacle unfolding on their front lawn. The heavy, violent pounding of armored fists on the solid oak front door echoed through the grand foyer, shaking the picture frames on the walls. "Federal agents, open the door right now," a deep, booming voice demanded from the porch. I stood quietly in the hallway, watching the red and blue lights dance across the tear-stained faces of the people who had made my entire life a living hell. The ultimate truth had finally been delivered. The absolute payoff was complete, and the authorities had finally arrived to clean up the toxic mess my family had created. The heavy oak front door was breached with a loud, shattering crack that echoed through the entire mansion. Heavy combat boots pounded against the imported marble of the grand foyer. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical gear poured into the house, fanning out with practiced precision. Their heavy flashlights swept across the expensive artwork and the luxurious furniture before finally illuminating the dining room. "Nobody move," a stern voice commanded, cutting through the suffocating tension. Spencer was already lying face down on the floor, his hands trembling behind his head. Two agents immediately stepped over the shattered porcelain and spilled wine, pulling his arms back violently and snapping heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The sharp metallic click of the locks sounded like a death sentence in the quiet room. They hauled him up roughly by his ruined silk shirt, dragging him toward the door. Spencer did not look back. He did not say goodbye to Vanessa or apologize to my parents. He just kept his head down, staring at the floor as the reality of his long prison sentence finally crushed him completely. Vanessa pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. An agent approached her, holding up a tablet with her digital financial records. "Vanessa, you are also coming with us," the agent stated coldly. "We need to ask you some very specific questions regarding the wire transfers from your parents' retirement accounts." Vanessa let out a pathetic whimper, but she offered no resistance as they escorted her out. My mother and father watched their golden child and their perfect son-in-law being marched out the front door like common criminals. The blue and red lights flashing through the windows painted their faces in harsh, alternating colors. The absolute destruction of their entire world was now complete. My father slowly turned his head to look at me. The anger and the stubborn pride were entirely gone. He looked like a hollow, empty shell of a man. He pushed himself up from the floor, his knees popping loudly, and took a shaky step toward me. "Morgan, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic sob. "You have to stop this. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. You work for the government. You know these people. You can make this go away. Drop the charges, Morgan. Please save our family." My mother crawled across the floor, grabbing the hem of my skirt just like Vanessa had done minutes earlier. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "We are so sorry, Morgan," she cried heavily. "We were blind. We trusted the wrong person. But we are still your parents. Please do not take our home away from us. Do not let them put our daughter in prison. We can fix this. We can be a real family again." I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel like I was absolutely nothing. I looked at the father, who had just threatened to have the police drag me out by my hair. I looked at the mother, who had called me a cold-blooded snake for trying to protect her life savings. They were only apologizing because they had lost their power. They were only begging because I was the only one holding the keys to their survival. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, forcing my mother to let go of my clothes. "I cannot drop federal charges, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "The government does not negotiate with Ponzi scheme operators. And even if I could wave a magic wand and make all of this go away, I absolutely would not do it." My father's face crumbled. "But why?" he gasped, holding his chest. "Why would you destroy your own flesh and blood?" "I did not destroy you," I replied, staring directly into his tear-filled eyes. "I tried to save you. I paid your taxes. I fixed your property. I tried to warn you about Spencer. But you did not want to be saved by me. You wanted to be elevated by him. You chose to believe a white con artist over your own daughter because you cared more about country club status than the truth." I paused, letting my words sink deep into their broken minds. "You chose your family?" "Dad," I said softly. "And it was not me." I turned my back on them and walked slowly out of the dining room. I did not look back as the federal agents began asking them questions about the forged mortgage documents. I simply walked up the grand sweeping staircase toward my bedroom, leaving them entirely alone with the police and the devastating consequences of their own toxic choices. 6 months later, the warm Atlanta sun was beating down on the blooming rose garden behind my estate. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to choke the life out of this property was completely gone. The air felt clean and peaceful. The federal trial had been swift and absolutely brutal. Spencer took a plea deal to avoid a life sentence, but the judge showed absolutely no mercy to a man who had stolen millions of dollars from elderly church members and innocent retirees. He was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There are no custom-tailored suits or designer watches where he is going. Just a tiny concrete cell and the crushing weight of his own failure. Vanessa managed to avoid prison time by completely turning on her husband and testifying for the prosecution. She traded all of his secrets for a suspended sentence and 5 years of strict federal probation. But her glamorous influencer lifestyle was permanently destroyed. The bank seized all of her designer bags, her expensive cars, and her jewelry to pay back her creditors. The last time I checked, she was working the cash register at a local discount store. She wears a cheap polyester uniform and scans barcodes for minimum wage, entirely stripped of the fake empire she sacrificed her family to build. As for my parents, their fall from grace was absolute. They were officially evicted from the Buckhead mansion exactly 24 hours after the raid. Their wealthy country club friends completely abandoned them the moment the scandal hit the local news. Nobody wanted to be associated with the parents of a convicted federal fraudster. With their retirement accounts completely drained and their credit ruined, they had nowhere else to turn. They currently live in a cramped Section 8 apartment on the outskirts of the city. I hear they spend their days sitting in silence, drowning in regret, wondering how they managed to lose absolutely everything. They have tried to call me a few times, but I immediately blocked their numbers. I do not owe them my time, my money, or my forgiveness. I stood in the center of the garden, taking a deep breath of the fragrant morning air. I had officially hired a demolition crew to tear down the guest house where they had tried to banish me. In its place, I built a beautiful modern greenhouse filled with vibrant exotic plants. The main mansion is now entirely mine. I redesigned the dining room, replaced the broken crystal, and filled the house with people who actually care about me. Friends, colleagues, and chosen family who respect me for who I am, not for what I can buy them. Standing here looking at the beautiful life I built from the ashes of their destruction, I finally understand the absolute truth about family. We are conditioned to believe that blood requires infinite loyalty. We are told that we have to forgive toxic parents and abusive siblings simply because we share the same DNA. But that is a dangerous lie designed to keep victims trapped in a cycle of endless abuse. True family does not use you as a financial asset. True family does not constantly belittle your achievements to elevate someone else. And true family definitely does not smile and tell you to eat your last meal before throwing you out onto the street. If you are sitting in the dark right now feeling like you are the black sheep or the scapegoat of your family, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your worth is not determined by the people who are too blind to see your value. Their inability to love you is their failure, not yours. You have the power to walk away. You have the power to stop financing their delusions. And you absolutely have the power to build a beautiful, successful life entirely on your own terms. It is terrifying to cut the cord. It is painful to realize that the people who were supposed to protect you are actually your biggest enemies. But the moment you stop seeking their approval is the exact moment you finally become unstoppable. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member who constantly drained your energy and your bank account? How did you finally find the courage to cut them off and choose yourself? I would absolutely love to hear your personal stories of triumph and resilience in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and reclaiming your power. And if you know someone who is currently struggling with a toxic family dynamic, please share this video with them. Sometimes all it takes is hearing someone else tell their truth to realize that you are not alone, and that walking away is not a crime, it is survival. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of this community. Always remember that the best revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. The best revenge is moving on and becoming incredibly successful without them. Keep building your empire and never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own life.